Much to the controversy surrounding the modern global landscape, a recurring question emerges. Why do certain countries harbor strong resentment or unfavorable opinions toward the United States? In 2025, the world's geopolitical climate is more polarized than ever, and while America remains a dominant force economically and militarily, its influence is not universally welcomed. This complex sentiment is rooted in a blend of historical grievances, political ideologies, economic sanctions, and cultural differences. Here, we delve deep into 10 countries where anti-American sentiment is most pronounced, exploring the intricate web of factors contributing to these strained relationships. 1. Russia. The relationship between the United States and Russia has been fraught with tension for decades. But in 2025, the hostility has reached new heights. The collapse of the Cold War's ideological battleground did little to ease the underlying mistrust between these two powers. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 and Russia's ongoing involvement in Ukraine have led to severe U.S.-imposed sanctions, crippling significant sectors of the Russian economy. These sanctions, combined with NATO's eastern expansion, are viewed by many Russians as a direct threat to their sovereignty and national pride. The Russian government, under Vladimir Putin's continued influence, has capitalized on this narrative, portraying the U.S. as an imperialist force seeking to undermine Russian stability and global standing. The result is a deeply ingrained skepticism, not just of American policies, but of American culture and values. Russian state-controlled media consistently reinforce these narratives, casting the U.S. as an aggressor intent on diminishing Russia's influence on the global stage. This portrayal resonates deeply with a population already burdened by economic hardship and nationalistic fervor. 2. China. China's relationship with the United States is a complex tapestry of economic interdependence and strategic rivalry. The trade wars of the late 2010s set the stage for a broader geopolitical struggle that continues into 2025. The U.S.'s efforts to curb China's technological advancements, especially in areas like 5G and artificial intelligence, have been perceived as attempts to stifle China's rightful place as a global leader. Additionally, U.S. support for Taiwan and criticism of China's human rights abuses in Xinjiang and Hong Kong have exacerbated tensions. Chinese state media often portrays the U.S. as a declining power, desperate to maintain its hegemony through unfair practices and moral hypocrisy. This narrative resonates with many Chinese citizens, fostering a nationalistic disdain for American influence. Furthermore, the Belt and Road Initiative's global outreach contrasts starkly with U.S. foreign policy, positioning China as a champion of economic development against America's perceived interference and destabilization tactics. 3. Iran. The animosity between the United States and Iran dates back to the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the subsequent U.S. Embassy hostage crisis. Decades of sanctions, military confrontations, and diplomatic isolation have only deepened this rift. The U.S.'s withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, in 2018 under the Trump administration was a significant blow to diplomatic efforts, leading to renewed sanctions that crippled Iran's economy. In 2025, these sanctions remain largely in place, contributing to widespread economic hardship and fueling anti-American sentiment among the Iranian populace. The Iranian government often uses the U.S. as a scapegoat for domestic issues, framing America as the principal adversary to Iranian sovereignty and Islamic values. This narrative is deeply embedded in Iran's political discourse, with hardline factions leveraging anti-Americanism to consolidate power and suppress dissent. Cultural clashes, particularly over issues like women's rights and freedom of expression, further deepen the divide between the two nations. 4. North Korea. North Korea's disdain for the United States is both ideological and deeply personal. The Korean War, 1950-1953, ended in an armistice, not a peace treaty, leaving the peninsula technically still at war. The U.S. military presence in South Korea and its continued sanctions against the North are seen as ongoing acts of aggression. The regime, led by Kim Jong-un, uses anti-American rhetoric as a tool to maintain internal control, painting the U.S. as the ultimate enemy of the Korean people. Propaganda is deeply ingrained in North Korean society, with Americans often depicted as brutal imperialists intent on destroying the nation. This narrative ensures that anti-American sentiment remains a cornerstone of North Korean identity. The state's isolationist policies and control over information flow mean that most North Koreans have little exposure to alternative perspectives, entrenching their government's portrayal of the U.S. as a malevolent force. 5. Venezuela. Venezuela's relationship with the United States has deteriorated significantly over the past 2 decades. The rise of Hugo Chavez and his Bolivarian revolution marked the beginning of a staunchly anti-American foreign policy, which has been continued by his successor, Nicolás Maduro. U.S. sanctions targeting Venezuela's oil industry and financial sector have had devastating effects on the country's economy, leading to hyperinflation, widespread poverty, and mass emigration. The Venezuelan government blames these hardships squarely on American imperialism, using this narrative to rally domestic support and delegitimize opposition forces, many of whom receive backing from the U.S. The result is a deeply entrenched animosity towards American policies and, by extension, Americans themselves. State-run media frequently highlight U.S. interventions in Latin America's history, framing Venezuela's struggles as part of a larger resistance against foreign domination. 6. Turkey. Turkey's relationship with the United States is a complicated mix of alliance and antagonism. As a NATO member, Turkey has historically been a strategic partner of the U.S., but recent developments have strained this relationship. U.S. support for Kurdish groups in Syria, which Turkey considers terrorist organizations, has been a significant point of contention. Additionally, the U.S.'s refusal to extradite Fethullah Gulen, whom Turkey accuses of orchestrating the 2016 coup attempt, has further soured relations. The Turkish government, under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, often portrays the U.S. as an unreliable and duplicitous ally. Economic sanctions and diplomatic spats have only fueled this perception, leading to a rise in anti-American sentiment among the Turkish populace. Nationalistic rhetoric, emphasizing Turkey's sovereignty and historical grievances against Western powers, has become a staple of Erdogan's political strategy. 7. Pakistan. Pakistan's relationship with the United States has been marked by a complex interplay of cooperation and mistrust. While the two countries have collaborated extensively in the fight against terrorism, incidents such as the U.S. raid that killed Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad without prior notification to Pakistani authorities have fueled feelings of betrayal and sovereignty violation. Additionally, U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan's tribal regions have caused civilian casualties, further exacerbating anti-American sentiments. Many Pakistanis view the U.S. as a self-interested power that disregards Pakistan's sovereignty and sacrifices. The perception of U.S. favoritism towards India in regional disputes, particularly over Kashmir, also contributes to the strained relationship. The Pakistani media often highlights these issues, framing the U.S. as a manipulative actor in South Asia's complex geopolitics. 8. Cuba. Cuba's animosity towards the United States is deeply rooted in history. The Cuban Revolution of 1959, led by Fidel Castro, brought about a communist government that quickly became a thorn in the side of U.S. foreign policy. The subsequent U.S. embargo, aimed at isolating the Cuban economy, has been in place for over 6 decades, causing significant economic hardship for the Cuban people. While there were brief periods of thawing relations, such as during the Obama administration, subsequent U.S. policies have reversed much of this progress. The Cuban government continues to blame the U.S. for the country's economic difficulties, using anti-American rhetoric as a unifying tool. This has resulted in a pervasive mistrust of American intentions among the Cuban populace. Cultural exchanges and limited tourism have done little to bridge this gap, as the enduring legacy of the embargo overshadows efforts at rapprochement. 9. Palestinian territories. The United States' unwavering support for Israel is the primary source of animosity in the Palestinian territories. U.S. policies, including the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and continued military aid to Israel, are viewed as direct endorsements of Israeli actions against Palestinians. This perception has fueled widespread resentment and mistrust towards the U.S., seen not just as a biased mediator, but as an active participant in Palestinian suffering. The humanitarian crises in Gaza and the West Bank are often attributed to American complicity, and this sentiment is deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness of the Palestinian people. U.S. diplomatic efforts are often dismissed as insincere, with many Palestinians believing that American interests are irrevocably tied to Israeli security and dominance. 10. Iraq. The 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, justified by the now discredited claims of weapons of mass destruction, left an indelible mark on the country's psyche. While the removal of Saddam Hussein was initially welcomed by some, the subsequent years of violence, political instability, and sectarian conflict have been blamed largely on American intervention. The presence of U.S. troops, civilian casualties from military operations, and the perception of American exploitation of Iraqi resources have all contributed to a deep-seated resentment. Many Iraqis view the U.S. as an occupier rather than a liberator, and this sentiment persists in 2025, fueled by ongoing political and economic challenges. The rise of militant groups in the power vacuum left by U.S. forces further complicates the narrative, painting America as both a catalyst and a failed overseer of Iraq's tumultuous journey. In conclusion, the animosity towards the United States in these countries is a complex interplay of historical grievances, political ideologies, and economic realities. While some of this resentment is directed towards specific policies and actions of the U.S. government, it often extends to a broader distrust of American culture and influence. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for navigating the intricate web of international relations in an increasingly polarized world. The path to improving these relationships requires nuanced diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and a willingness to address the root causes of these deeply entrenched sentiments. Only through sustained, genuine efforts at reconciliation and mutual respect can the United States hope to mend these fractured relationships and foster a more cooperative global environment.